This episode is brought to you by Ghost Patch. Ghost Patch is a law enforcement-owned and operated company specializing in patches, coins, and flex shields. Quality is top priority with low prices. They always offer free design work and never charge mold or setup fees. Stop letting the big companies rip you off and check out Ghost Patch at ghostpatch.com and ghostpatchcustom.com. Now to the next story.
You know, you're doing things for people that can never do something back for you. He goes, it's easy to go above and beyond when someone can pay you back. Said these people are never going to be able to do anything for you, but you still try. And that held significance with me throughout my entire time on this unit. I'm the point, and I see a shadow. The shadow comes to light, and he has a gun in his hand. The first thing I do is, yell out gun. I sling my less lethal shotgun. I pull out my pistol, and I start, confronting him. And he's yelling at me. I'm yelling at him, and he's yelling, "Kill me, kill me. Kill me right now, kill me, kill me." And he puts the gun under his chin. I'm seriously, contemplating suicide. I'm getting real serious about it. And man, I am suffering in my own silence. And like I said, I didn't even have a lamp in my house. Never forget, I got a knock on my door. It's one of my friends. So I open the door, and he has 2 Walmart bags in his hand. He walks into my living room, and he pulls out lamps. And he goes, "Pal, I'm here to bring light to your darkness." And he saved my life that day.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide. Before I do this intro, I want to give a big shout out to Dallas PD's own Glenn Stone, badge 5341. His dedication and service to this department does not go unnoticed by this show. We are supposed to forgive the people who have hurt us, but that is easier said than done. We have all been hurt or wronged from time to time. But if you are in a situation where you can't let go of the anger and/or thoughts of revenge, it can start to be all-consuming. Betrayal or hurt can be devastating and bring up a mountain of negative emotions. If it weren't for forgiveness, we would have years and years of resentment and bitterness weighing us down. When we forgive someone, we aren't saying that what they did was okay, but instead we let go of resentment and bitterness towards that person or the things they did to wrong us. Forgiveness isn't forgetting how you were hurt, but it is allowing yourself to move on from that hurt. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what someone did. It is about healing your own heart. Today's guest has traveled over 1,800 miles to tell his story. The story began in Hull, Massachusetts, and had many ups and downs, which led him on a path to dedicate himself to service. Out of this dedication, the dream to become a police officer was born. In 2024, this guest reached out and told us how much our show, based in Dallas, Texas, has meant to him and has helped him grow as a professional and a person. This connection is one of the show's founding missions, connecting with others, educating the communities, and bridging divides. We are proud to welcome on a member of the Barnstable Police Department in Massachusetts.
Brandon Sanders, Barnstable PD, welcome to the mic.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, I want to welcome on the co-host. Danny Canetti's here. Kent's here. Brandon's fiance, Chanel, is sitting with us. She's first time to Dallas, right? Y'all coming in here?
It's our first time to Dallas.
First time to Texas?
Not the first time to Texas for me, no.
Okay.
But first time to the city.
Okay. Well, what do you think of it so far?
Hey, the Southern hospitality is a real thing, so I appreciate you guys.
Well, we're going to get into the brotherhood of the northeastern part of the country when it comes to the police brother and sisterhood, and I want to get into that because I have my perception of it, but I want to kind of hear it from you, and maybe I have a different what's in my mind is different than the reality because I know how it is here, but we're so immersed in it. You're getting the Texas Southern hospitality, but I just it's just same old for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look forward to answering any questions that you guys have regarding that.
We get a lot of questions. So I want to talk about growing up or early home life.
Okay. Yeah, so I grew up in Hull, Massachusetts. I spent my entire life there until I was 23. We grew up fairly single family home for the most part. My mother jumbled through relationships when I was a young kid, so my biological father was in and out the beginning of my life. He's actually down here, so we can get into that more. This is more of just coming to Dallas to participate in a podcast. There was a lot to unpack here. I look forward to getting into that.
You say your dad was in and out. Can you describe that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my father had his battles. He was never necessarily present when we were growing up. He was in and out of the system. He was in and out of jail. We would see him through state visitation. We would go to his house sometimes on the weekends, when things were looking up and between court dates and stuff like that. But
was it consistent?
It was never consistent. So I can't tell you that I necessarily ever knew him. So yeah, we can unpack that definitely as the show goes on.
Yeah. So you say he was in and out of jail. Being so young, what was your perception towards law enforcement at that point?
So, when this was kind of going on, right? So we're coming up, and my perception of law enforcement in my early life, I have a younger sister who had a serious seizure disorder. So when we were kind of growing up, the police would respond to the house often for medical emergencies. And my early perception of the police was, those guys and girls were great. They were super helpful. They were always the first ones there. My mother at the time had built, significant relationships with them. So in those early days when things were kind of the most stable, I admired it.
Did you ever look at something? Is that something you would like to do as a profession?
Yeah. So, as time went on, I was naturally kind of gravitated towards it. I remember saying when I was a kid, I wanted to be a dog cop. That's all I ever wanted to be, was a dog cop. I didn't know what necessarily it meant, but I'm like, hey, they got a dog and they're a cop. Kind of cool.
Cool German Shepherd.
Yeah, as like a 7-year-old kid, I'm like, that's something I could see myself doing. As time went on, that changed, but we obviously gravitated back.
How did it change?
As I'm kind of coming up, there was no real male influence in my life, right? I had a desire for it. All I ever wanted was like a role model. My mother remarried. That was probably the stablest my childhood ever was. He was a good guy, but it wasn't long. My mother began having an affair a short time later. That trickled into the, good guy being out of the house, and the replacement, if that's what we want to call it, was just chaos.
Brandon, you mentioned, in your bio, you and your sister had to police the household. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so when, this individual moves into the house, for a substantial amount of time, it was years. I don't think I'm lying when I say that every single night it was a domestic in the house, like no matter what. At least a verbal domestic every single night. It was loud. It was heated. It was tension. And my sister, we have the same birthday. We're 3 years apart. We were inseparable growing up, and my sister would always look out for me. But my sister couldn't do it all alone, right? So every night, almost like clockwork, the fight would start. It would go on, and my sister would come knock on my door. She'd come in and say, "Hey, it's time." And we would go downstairs, and when I tell you legitimately, I've been working domestic since I was 7 or 8 years old. Just like they teach it by the numbers, we're separating the parties. We're getting both sides of the story. We're trying to mediate. We're figuring out what it is. And it was pretty much every night.
How old are you right then?
So this starts probably around 8.
And your sister's older than you?
My sister's was 11 at the time.
Okay.
Yep. So my sister's 3 years older to the day.
It sounds like y'all have a system. You had to have a system just to kind of somewhat keep the peace in that house.
That's it. If we were, it just was what it was. Every night it would be, and hey, we got to go get involved. And
were the police called out much during that? Or?
So I will tell you, the police did not respond to that house one single time.
Because you had your own internal police, basically, with some kids.
No one ever called. No one honestly ever. I don't even think anyone thought to call. I think a lot of it, obviously all of it was behind closed doors, right? Out in public every day, say, we're not going to bed till late. We're going to school the next day, and we're firing on all cylinders. It's just, you're kind of an autopilot at that point, right?
How long did that go on?
At least a couple of years. Probably 2 or 3 years at least.
How did you meet Ryan Ross? And just tell the listener who he was in your life at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, right. So I'm kind of just gliding through at this point, and, I'm looking for my direction, and I got after I got my license, I got a job at one of the local pizza shops, called Nantasket Seafood and Hall. And the local police would frequent it, for their meals. And, I'm in there and I'm just me, I'm a little punk kid, and, I think everything that isn't the right way to do it is the right way to do it. At this point, I really have no direction, right? And I remember one day Ryan Ross comes in. I'm probably about 16 and a half at this point. And he is probably about 24. Yeah, he's about
new cop. Yeah.
New cop. We're about 8 years apart. And I'll just never forget the uniform, right? Like, when I say the uniform, shine boots, pressed, all the brass is straight. It was just, it was at that point right then and there, I knew that was my direction to go. He was young, and I'm like, hey, that's only 8 years apart, right? And it was just something about that specific uniform, and the way he wore it, and the confidence that had radiated off of him was what I wanted in my life, right?
it probably symbolized order for you because you had a life of disorder.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
And you were 16?
I was 16.
Okay.
Yeah. I had just recently got my license. So in Massachusetts, it's 16 and a half. And these guys I had known my whole life at this pizza shop. My grandmother, God bless her, she's no longer with us. But my grandmother was a lifelong real estate agent. She was a broker. She owned her own brokerage in the town of Hull. And she had an office next door. So, as a kid, swing in, nothing better than going in and seeing your grandmother. And so she had rented the unit to them originally. So she had known them for many, many, many years. And she introduced me to them, and, they brought me on just delivering pizza, trying to give me something to do. And, all of this happens as a result.
Yeah, one thing led to another, really, and you met Ryan. So did you have interactions with him, befriend him, and he kind of become a big brother?
Yeah, so of all things, right? So my interaction with him was he kind of, calls me out for being a punk. And, it was hilarious. We kind of hit it off right away. And the next thing he does is he asks me, right, he's calling a spade a spade. He asked me if I can sell his subwoofers for him. He's like, yeah, I got a pair of subwoofers. Any chance you can get rid of these things for me? And he gives me his phone number. And I'm like, I'm proud at that point. I'm like, oh, I'm going to take care of this for you. Don't worry. And, we've had a really great relationship ever since. He's actually accepted the role to be the best man for me in our wedding next year.
Nice.
So,
what kind of influence, though, did he have as far as a father figure or a big brother?
Yeah, I would definitely say it was more of a big brother role. It was just somebody that, I looked up to.
Did he know about your home life?
Yeah.
Okay.
We discussed a lot of that, and, he would answer the phone, and, we'd shoot texts, and we'd see each other a lot, at the pizza shop, and just got to know each other. And, I think that was just kind of, for me, it symbolized everything that I could be, right? And I kind of never lost vision of that from there.
You got into the first responder world as an EMT. Did Ryan kind of steer you to that, or how'd that work?
All right, so my senior year of high school, so I am like, no matter what, it's cop, 100%. I'm going to be a cop. It doesn't matter how I get there. I didn't care where. I didn't care how, but I was going to be a cop. And, I'm looking for a way to kind of break into the public safety world. In Massachusetts, we can't apply to be a cop until we're 21. So I graduate high school on a Saturday. I start EMT school on Monday. And I went through that. I completed that course, and I began working on an ambulance a short time later.
For what department?
I was working in the city of Brockton for a private company at the time. I worked for both Brewster EMS and East Care is what it was called. It could be a mixture of anything through the day. My specific role wasn't like a primary 911 at the time. We were doing a lot of transports. But we would go up to Boston all the time and assist them a little bit here and there, which was a really cool experience for me. A couple days over 19 at the time,
In big city of Boston.
Yeah, the city of Brockton, the city of Boston, kind of anything in between. And
describe Brockton as far as size wise, because just for the listeners, because we're all Texans here.
I would say Brockton's probably about a population of 100,000. I absolutely could be inaccurate on that.
Yeah, we'll have fact checkers coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I'd say about 100,000. Busy, very, very busy city.
You've been breaking up domestic, fights since you were 7 or 8. Now you're exposed to all sorts of violence. the result of violence and also just medical emergencies.
Yep.
How did you adapt to that?
I honestly didn't, if I'm being honest. As we kind of tell the story, we'll get into where that all breaks.
Okay.
But it's just everything's kind of autopilot at this point. It's cop no matter what. So at this point, I am working as an EMT. I'm working as a substitute teacher in the town of Hull school systems, and I was working a civilian job at a local police department. Kind of sitting on the front desk, just doing anything possible to break into the profession. So I'm working all three of those jobs, and I'm also putting myself through school. So I was going to Quincy College trying to get my associate's degree in criminal justice. Like I said, just working towards building my resume. I'm like, I want to be a cop at 21 no matter what. And this is when police jobs were, highly competitive. So, I was immersed for about 3 full years.
What year is this?
This was 2015.
Okay. So once you turned 21, you got your foot in the door of you could actually apply for a department. Tell us about that and what department it was.
So my first sworn police position was with the town of Norwell Police Department. I started working there in 2016. I got hired as a special police officer. So at the time, special officers would basically just supplement staffing, whether that was kind of sitting on the desk, working traffic details, security details, really anything to get your foot in the door.
Is that kind of the normal for young officers up there?
So it used to be.
Okay.
Especially from my neck of the woods in the South Shore, that was pretty much the only way to get in the door if you were not a veteran.
Wow. How long did you work there?
I worked there until I went full-time with Hull. They never took my status away. So I worked there, and I also worked for the town of Duxbury. I got hired into a role they call a permanent intermittent police officer. So I had full police authority. I pushed a cruiser. I'd answer calls. I'd stop cars. I'd do everything a normal cop would do. I was just less than full-time.
Do they still do that practice up there?
I think it's becoming a lot less. With certification, complexities, you're not seeing that so much anymore.
What kind of certification does Massachusetts have? We have TCOL here in Texas. What is it called there?
So now you get certified through what they call the Post Commission. So that would be you complete the academy, you pass all your certifications. So
you get the annual updates and stuff.
Yes,
okay.
Yep, absolutely. So when I started, I had what they called a reserve intermittent police academy. So I'd go a couple nights a week, and I'd go Saturday all day. It was about 400 hours, and that was enough to get you into a special role or a permanent intermittent role. And typically how it would work was that's how you would start. You'd go get that certification. A department would pick you up as a PI, and they would pen you full-time. So ultimately, you would backfill full-time positions.
So what about training with that agency? So once you get that certification, is there no training? You're just right on the job, and it's...
So I did a field training program
Okay.
When I started there, and I ended up going to midnights once they assigned me a shift, and I worked for my first assigned supervisor, and that guy made a significant impact on my police profession.
How so?
He just wanted to teach you. He wanted you to be the best. And Duxbury was a great place to start because it wasn't super busy. So when we had a call or we had an arrest or, something that we would have to type, he would sit with you and he would bring you through an entire report, and he would teach you how to make that report the best. He would teach you how to, do all the systems. He would even say it was a slow night, right? So here's an example. it's a slow night. It's about 3 a.m. We'd kind of all wait around, if there was a rush or there was calls. And he would send me a text and say, hey, meet me over at whatever building. And he would like set up a mock B&E at that building and show up, and he'd be like, yeah, go ahead. You're called here for an alarm. And I'd go work a call, and he'd basically sit there and, he'd judge how you did it, and, he'd mentor it and he'd teach you. And he gave me, right, so if like policing, if you're building a house, right, he laid the foundation for me, and, he made a significant impact, did a great job.
You seem to like to stay busy.
Yes.
You had 3 jobs in school when you were still under 21, and then you're working. Is it just for one department, or could you work with multiple departments at the same time?
So if you were less than full time, so when I was working for Norwell and Duxbury, I requested both, and they both acknowledged that I was working at each department, and they were okay with it. At the time, the chiefs had communicated, and it was one day I'd be a Norwell cop, and the next day I'd be a Duxbury cop, or maybe at the time I was a Duxbury cop for the midnight shift, but I'd be a Norwell cop for a traffic detail at 8 a.m. And, it was kind of a cool setup.
That is fascinating with different policies and procedures for usually how we work here with different agencies, and you're basically working multiple agents. You're an officer for multiple agencies.
At the time, yeah. Yep.
A lot of the big departments are super policy driven too, where the smaller ones, they're not so policy driven. So he could probably pull that off a little bit easier working for somebody that doesn't have 3,000 page SOP. What do you do now though? Like, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but you can't have just one job. It seems like you don't sit still.
No. So, so right now, and we'll get into it. So, I work as a police officer full time in the town of Barnstable. And on the side, I do real estate.
Okay.
That's like a full-time job. That's not a part-time job, just real estate on the side. That seems a little bit crazy to me. Like I know several people do it, but that's a lot of work. It's not one of those things you can just be like, tomorrow I'm going to do real estate for a day or two.
Yeah, no. If you want to be successful at it, you gotta stay on it.
That's wild.
We're doing our best.
Yeah. Well, let's get into Barnstable PD, and can you talk about that city and that department?
First off, did he pronounce it correctly?
He did.
Okay.
Yes.
I just learned the correct.
Yeah. So just to briefly touch on it. So when I left Norwell and Duxbury, I left to accept a full-time position in my hometown in Hull, and for me it was. So right, that you talk about significance. That was my significance. Right? It was like, this is where I grew up. This is where I felt, all of my emotions. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go home and be a cop. And I felt like it was the right thing to do. I felt like it was the right people to serve. And ultimately, I left a short time later, working in a 6.5 mile town with a small population, with, arresting people and going to calls for service with, it's not, and, I am like the farthest thing ever from a respect guy, right? Like this isn't about, but like you talk about, right? It's funny. I would go to homes for calls for service, and it would not be like, oh, officer, how are you? It's like, oh, Brandon, how's your grandmother? Oh, how's everybody? How's the sister doing? Like, oh, yeah. And so it was just, right, and you mix all of that in with having to be a cop and having to police it.
Is your mother still in town?
Yes.
What about your sister?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone's still there at the time, and still. But
did that discourage you? As far you got to the peak of where at the time that's where you wanted to be. You're wearing the same uniform Ryan's wearing. You get there, and then it's not exactly how you imagined it.
Yeah. So Ryan, just a quick clarification on that. So Ryan worked one town over, but he started in Hull. So I go home, and it was difficult. it was just very different. It was like, you know what? I came out in Hull, right? As you said, I like to stay busy. Right? I don't think that's a secret to anybody. My brain goes 10, million miles a minute. And I'm all over the place, 6.5 miles, I know everybody. It was just, it wasn't going to last. So I ultimately left. Yes. I went to a training class in late 2019, early 2020. And I remember the instructor said, if you do not see a future for yourself in your current police department in 5 years, why are you wasting another minute? And I went home that day and I said, I'm going to leave. I committed myself to that. And fast forward, I began poking around the general area, doing some research on departments that had more than 100 officers. I felt like that would be, a better fit for me, just with a little more patrol area, a little more separation, obviously more opportunity, right? And I emailed Barnstable. Barnstable got back to me. And July of 20, my civil service transfer was complete, and I began my career there.
Talk about that department. What size, sworn-wise, is that?
Hull or Duxbury?
Barnstable.
Hull or Barnstable. So yeah. Barnstable, we have about 118 officers.
Okay.
Top to bottom. We have, quite a great patrol area. We're big. I believe it's 76 square miles. Okay. And we have everything in our town that any small city would have. We have an airport, we have a transportation authority, we have a hospital.
What is the crime like?
It's village specific. Hyannis is known kind of as like, the joking around. It's kind of like, oh yeah, the big city, the big city of Cape Cod. We have our quieter villages. We service 7 zip codes. So it's kind of cool because, right, when you're working patrol, you can kind of be a city cop one day, and the next day you're, a little more of a rural cop, a little more of a, it's just different.
It's a variety.
It's a variety, and that appealed to me for sure. Just because when, I know people say that when you're a cop, every day is different, but for us, legitimately, every day can be. Which is
because you're not just. I mean, Danny and I are out in Canada, southeast. We pretty much go up and down the same streets, working in that division, and then you're kind of going all over the place.
Yeah. So,
talk about the unit that you're on now. Can you describe that?
Yeah. So, March of 23, we had internal posting go out for the community impact unit. And I was kind of figuring myself out still, right? And it was so much different from everything that I had ever done. The community impact unit, we will, it's such a variety, right? So it can be anything from like homeless outreach, trying to service, less fortunate people that, are struggling with mental illness, street homeless population. An hour later we could be, conducting an investigation into, say, drug activity or, complaints on specific property, stuff like that. An hour later, I can be at the senior center doing, a coffee with a cop or, a community event. And typically the community impact unit doesn't get sent primary to calls. So if you're self-motivated and you kind of have a vision for it, I had gone in working under a new sergeant that had just been hired at the time. And his vision for it was, very appealing to me.
What was that?
he was super open-minded, towards, if you had an idea, you thought of something that might be a little unorthodox, or, hey, Sarge, what about this? He would always hear you, whether we would execute it that way or not, whether we'd follow through with it or not. He puts a lot of trust in his officers, and that was very good for me, figuring out, at the time, right, still I'm figuring out who I am and figuring out kind of my vision, and, as my life progresses still, and working with some of these vulnerable populations was, such a learning experience for me, because, I think the number one thing for me that really resonated with it was, I was just a couple of decisions myself, away from possibly being there. And, building a rapport with people, people see you every day, and, they grow to trust you, and, you try to do right by people. And, I remember one of my really good friends said to me, and it always resonated, was, you're doing things for people that can never do something back for you. Right? Like that. He goes, it's easy to go above and beyond when someone can pay you back. Said these people are never going to be able to do anything for you, but you still try. And, that held significance with me throughout my, entire time on this unit. And I'm just grateful to have been a part of it.
Those community impact units are unique in the fact that your typical police officer shows up when something's happened, right? Something bad has happened to you or to somebody else. And when you're in that community impact unit, you get the chance to show up when there's not something bad happening, and you get to be more of the face of the department, and you get to see people when they're not in crisis. So those are important units, but it's completely different than your typical patrol officer or traffic officer or anything like that that takes enforcement on people.
Yeah, and it's, kind of seeing, if you do it right, you can positively impact a lot, right? It's not just maybe specific to one person. It's not necessarily specific to one area. It's kind of like a grand scheme type of thing, right? If you do it right and you're taking pride in what you're doing, seeing the results ultimately, it has a lasting effect on you. And, I can give one example. There was, one individual who was, immersed in the homeless population. He was street homeless for a period of time. I had contacted him numerous times and arrested him a couple of times. And, he one day, he's out doing whatever it is he's doing. And I pull over and I contact him and I said, hey, get in the truck right now. I'm going to bring you to where you need to go. I want you to go to rehab. Because we operate on a, jail diversion is what we call it. Right. So, and he did. He got in. I drove him down to one of the health centers and I walked him in. I said, hey, he's going to be connected to rehab. If you guys can meet me in the middle, that would be great. And I never saw him again. Right. So one day I'm out in the community and a car pulls up behind my cruiser and an individual gets out and it's him. And he just goes, Sanders, look at me. And he's kind of going like a head to toe. He's like, look at me. Sanders, look at me. And I'm like, dude, you look awesome. And he's like, you saved my life. He said, you holding me accountable got me to where I needed to be. And, that was like an ultimate compliment at the time because my style was unique. And hearing that my style could positively impact somebody that much, that sat with me heavy that day.
Well, a good community unit like that can really change the perception of the police department, and we've all witnessed it in our careers. You have guys that work in that unit that anytime you show up to a call, even the troublemakers are asking, like, hey, can you bring this guy over? Can you call this guy? And you can make a difference in a different way. So it's a good unit, man. I like those.
Yeah, and it was something that was, for me, was like so outside of what was predictable for my career path, right? Because I'm like super proactive officer, and it could be anything from OUI arrests to traffic stops to drug enforcement to you name it. I'm like, I think when I put in for that, it was kind of like a testament to myself at the time, because it was so different from all of my original, kind of interests getting into the career, right? But at this point in my life, I'm like, I felt, my own crisis. I felt my own issues and, things that I was still working through in my own life. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe this is a chance that I can give back to people that need it the most. And obviously, the rest is history, as we've previously discussed.
And it did. You changed an individual's life and their path. But we're going to get into changing your path, because you needed to change, but maybe you weren't aware at the time.
Yes.
So I want to get into a critical incident, and I just kind of paint a picture for the listener on this whole thing. I know that you reached out to me, damn near a year ago, and you know how these go, and I want you just to speak to the listeners and kind of let them visualize what your experience was.
Yeah. So obviously the episode flows as we discussed. One specific incident is always makes the show a little easier if we're here talking about crisis and overcoming serious issues. So so this specific incident, right, I'm going to keep it pretty vague, but units get sent to a house for a disturbance, and they show up and develop probable cause to arrest a subject, and the investigating officers on scene are gathering some information, and some red flags are starting to go up, and they call for a little more help. So me and another officer, head out to this specific location at the time, and kind of make a little bit of a plan. It had come to our attention that he probably has firearms. Comes to our attention that he's, it sounds like he's absolutely in a serious crisis at the time, and alcohol, obviously playing a factor as well. And so me and this other officer go out there, we meet the officers on scene, and we kind of make a plan, and we, start to approach the house from a distance, and I'm in front, and I had a less lethal shotgun with me at the time, and we're kind of talking through roles, and another officer has a rifle and another officer has a taser, and another, typical as we would all approach a serious critical incident, not knowing what lies around the corner, right? So we approach, and I'm the point, and I see a shadow coming out of the area that we believe that this individual's at the time, and he rounds the shadow comes to light, and he has a gun in his hand, and the first thing I do is yell out gun. I sling my less lethal shotgun, I pull out my pistol, and I start confronting him, and he's yelling at me, I'm yelling at him, say we're 15 feet apart, and he's yelling, kill me, kill me, kill me right now, kill me, kill me. And he puts the gun under his chin, and, I'm yelling, drop the gun, drop the gun. and the other officers, are kind of separating from me at the time, kind of making a plan here. And this goes on for, obviously, right, we've all been involved with things like this, and you could say it goes on for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it feels like forever in the moment, right? It's probably realistically like 15, 20 seconds that this exchange is going on, but it's slowed down. And in your mind, right, you never forget the facial features, you never forget the it's so clear in my head that I remember the spit coming out of his mouth as he's screaming at me, kill me, kill me. And it's going on, and this exchange is happening, and he takes off back into what we believe to be the house. And shots were fired. No shots from officers, but shots were fired. Me and another officer are behind cover. We don't know if he's shooting at us. We don't know if he's shooting in the air. A lot of things are unclear at this time. But some shots definitely go off, and eventually, we slow it down, and the individual ended up taking his own life at some point through the exchange and the situation. But yeah, obviously tense and heated, and it never goes away in your head, right?
No, it doesn't, and it can definitely turn into a darkness, and that's what you kind of went into. You entered a new darkness, right?
Yeah. So, I guess the darkness for me kind of came in waves. The winter before this incident, I was probably in the darkest place that I've ever been in my life. I transferred to a department where I don't even know where their main street is. I jumped to this department on a complete leap of faith, to try to better my life and my career. I had gone through a, breakup of a long-term relationship. Obviously me and my family aren't really talking at all at this point because I left the area. And I moved probably about an hour away in the grand scheme. And I just couldn't get out of my own way. Like everything for me, I was working midnights at the time. I felt like I had never been so lonely in my life. I was just always alone, and I was always in the physical darkness, right? Working midnight shift. I'd go home, and I didn't even have a lamp in my house. It was just me, and I'm in this like strange place. This isn't home. I bought a house, and I'm kind of just winging everything, thinking I know it all. And I'm not listening to anybody. I'm not taking any advice. I thought I had it all figured out, right? And ultimately, I didn't. And that right there was the darkest time in my life. I had developed a pretty bad drinking problem behind the scenes. I would go home, I'd get off work at 8 a.m. and drive 25 minutes home, and the first thing I do is pop a, bottle of Jameson, and I would, I'd drink until hopefully I could get some sleep. I never, and at this point it was like I wasn't sleeping. I was barely eating. I had never been so sad. I had never felt so much regret with everything. It was just like everything's piling on. And I haven't, you got to keep it in mind here too, right? I hadn't unpacked anything from my past. I never, ever addressed a thing. I thought, the sequence of events was Brandon becomes a cop, and Brandon's everything that they weren't, right? Brandon was everything that his father wasn't. Brandon was everything that mother's boyfriend / husband, or, whatever he is at the time, he's everything that he isn't. Brandon's everything that he saw for himself, and everything goes away. Right? That's the way I see it. It's nothing. None of that ever happened. I'm successful. Hey, I'm a cop. I own my own house. I drive a decent vehicle. I got this. I'm that. I'm more mature than that. I've unpacked that. I've this. I didn't unpack a thing. And the loneliness and the sadness and that dark period of my life that was my rock bottom that I live every day of my life right now to never, ever visit again.
How did you get out of that?
Yeah, it just... Here's a story, right? So at this point, I'm like, I'm seriously, contemplating suicide. It's I don't hide from it. I'll tell this story to anybody that asks. I've told this story plenty of times. And I'm getting real serious about it. And it's just the dead of winter. And man, I am suffering in my own silence. And like I said, I didn't even have a lamp in my house, right? So never forget, I got a knock on my door, and it's one of my friends. He knew it. He saw me and him, our relationship was he's reading between the lines on where this is going for me, and he shows up in my house. I'll never forget it. I get a knock on the back door, and I'm not answering it. I'm like, I'm not entertaining anybody. Hey, get out of here. I'm all set. And he's texting me, come to the door. Hey, come to the door. So I open the door, and he has 2 Walmart bags in his hand. And he walks into my living room, and he pulls out lamps. And he goes, "Pal, I'm here to bring light to your darkness." And he saved my life that day. Because everything I had thought to myself, if I had committed suicide, was he the guy that was going to find me? He's the guy that goes and drives to Walmart on a night off to get lamps because he knows I'm wallowing in my sorrow in my dark house, and I'm not going to get out of it. That one gesture, that one small act from him that took him an hour of his life saved mine. And it was kind of there that I was able to start figuring things out on my own. I tried therapy. It failed miserably. I felt absolutely zero success from that. If I'm being honest, it didn't help me a single bit. I just started working the plan. I started working the day-to-day. I just started working on get back into the gym, start eating well. I became spiritual. I have a very strong belief in, Jesus Christ, and, that God's will, will lead you to the ultimate plan. You just need to follow it. And that I was destined for more than sitting in that dark house alone with no lamps, which later had multiple lamps, which, but, he says, "Pal, I'm here to bring light to your darkness." And from that moment, I'm like, well, how about I start bringing light to other people's darkness? How about, if someone can pay it forward at a Dunkin' Donuts for, you know, a cup of coffee for the guy before him, then why in the world can I not go out there knowing everything that I know right now and bring this energy to somebody else? And I began, you know, living my life like that. You know, after this incident that we previously talked about, you know, I definitely slipped back into, you know, some of the unhealthy habits. But knowing what I knew and coming from where I came from, you know, I actually managed to kind of self-recognize it. And I was able to kind of recorrect my own path.
Does that officer know this story as far as how close you were and how dark it was?
I think he does. I've never specifically told him.
You need to.
I do need to.
Yeah.
I absolutely do. I was actually thinking about this on our plane ride
He's
down
have a
here
name other
yesterday.
than just lamp guy.
Yeah.
You have a name for
He'll
him.
know, he'll know now.
Chris Lobianco is his name. And, you know, of all things, right, you kind of see how things come together. So Chris's grandmother was best friends with my grandmother. They grew up together, and they had been friends since they were like 8 years old. So when I was a Hull cop, Chris was a Hingham cop. And we never knew each other, you know. But our grandmothers would hang out, and, you know, they were the cool grandmothers. They'd go have Cosmos and go play bingo and do whatever they're doing. But so I remember my grandmother would always say, you need to, you know, meet Sally's grandsons. They're the best. You got to meet them. And eventually I did meet them, Chris being one of them. And we connected and we became great friends. And when I came to Barnstable, a short time later, Chris actually transferred and joined me in Barnstable. And he's been there, you know, I think he came down in 21, I believe. But yeah, Chris saved my life that winter. And, you know, shout out to him. And, you know, he, you know, I'm grateful for it.
That is true service.
Yeah.
Brandon, continuing on your path of service, and also like Kemp mentioned, you can't sit still, and you have to be active. Can you tell us about your real estate program and how that got going?
Yeah, absolutely. So this summer, so one of our dear friends, you know, a couple that we're friends with, they live in our neighborhood. Samantha Stewart is her name. She has been a real estate agent and broker for quite a long time. And we would always connect, and her and I would talk and spitball some ideas. And, you know, kind of one day we're sitting around the kitchen table, and, you know, I kind of bring up like, hey, what if I go get my real estate license? You know, that maybe I can give back to the first responder community. And she goes, do it. So I think one Google search, and, you know, as fast as I could enter my credit card into the site, I signed up for a real estate course to get my license, and 2 months later I was certified.
Damn.
And my vision for that was to give back to our community, because we all give so much, right? I don't think as I said earlier, I knew what it was like for home to not feel like home, right? Like, how important is it after a tough shift or, you know, whatever, to like, what's better than going home to your own home?
It's your safe haven.
It's your safe haven.
Going home to a home with lamps.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
So your first recommendation
to a home with lamps. So maybe regarding interior design, I'm not your guy, but I can absolutely get you connected to somebody that does. But right, so I connected with a mortgage broker. So anyways, I get my license, and I start working with Samantha. We have a team that she started. It's called SL Coastal Homes. We work through Compass. And Sam has empowered me to kind of take the ball and run with, however I can get these programs up and running. So we spitballed some ideas, and I connected with a mortgage broker. And he worked a lot with first responder personnel, and he had an idea of how kind of our salaries work, and hey, like it might be X on paper, but details, overtime, differentials, etc. You might, qualify for this. Or so I connected with him, and we kind of got this program up and running on Cape Cod, and Cape Cod's a unique area in and of itself because it's an expensive area to be, right? It's hard for a young family, to come in and own a home on Cape Cod. It's, even hard for a family, it's hard for a family anywhere, but in a competitive area like ours, I just wanted to be an advocate for all of them. I wanted them to feel like if they called me, it was sound advice and I had their best interest. And, to tell you the truth, if I make a couple of dollars here and there, that's great. But it had nothing to do with that. I felt like when I had gone through my home buying process, I bought and sold 2 homes, and, there was a lot of inconsistency, and there was a lot of, I felt underserved and, a lot of it. And I just didn't want anyone else to feel that same way. So we're up and running, and the calls are slowly trickling in, and obviously, how many, a first responder buys a home and they're probably going to be there for quite a long time. So it's not like we're, getting 25 phone calls a week, but, we're, I'm actively working with a couple of, people and, different age groups and different qualifications and stuff like that. And, I just want these guys and girls to be able to get off their shift, or, I want them to be able to go home, right? What's better than going home and sitting on your own couch? It's better than going home and, sitting in your own backyard and, having a fire, grilling your own dinner, or, cooking with your significant other, if there's kids, if there's pets, if I want you to go, I want you to go home. So that's why I started it, and that's our vision. And, I look forward to, getting people there.
You just sit there and kind of, you've been describing this whole episode and little things I've been picking up on, what most people would consider normal home life. You didn't have that.
No.
And now you're working on trying to help people have that something you never had. That is important to you.
It is.
Speaking of that, home life, Chanel's been sitting here for a couple hours, and you're a very busy man, obviously. And I want you to tell us how y'all began.
Yep. So Chanel and I met a little over 3 years ago. And Chanel came to me, at what a perfect time, because I had recognized, my faults and, my issues, and I had seriously dug in and started working on myself, right? And none of our paths are ever perfect, but it was the right time to meet her. Like, I was actually ready, and it was just easy. We met at a local restaurant for our first, it was a lunch date, and it was a great time. I knew right away I wanted to see her again. And Chanel was funny because Chanel would always be the one to I'm not going to rush a relationship. I'm not going to this. I'm not going to that, because she's her. And I remember we would go do events with her friends and stuff like that, and her friends would be giving me complete conflicting information. You got to ask her out, you got to lock her down, you got to she likes you, but so I end up on, which is the absolute worst anniversary date in the history of ever. We go to a Christmas party on December 26th, and our friends are like, you gotta do it. You gotta ask. So I asked, and having Christmas and an anniversary in the same, 48-hour window is not ideal. If for anyone that's looking to pursue a relationship, maybe just delay it a couple of weeks. Nothing crazy, you can just.
Never going to financially recover from that one.
No.
Wait for New Year's.
Yeah, that would have been a little more,
A week later.
So Chanel and I have been together ever since, and we live in Centerville. We have 2 awesome dogs. We have our little home unit, and we have, we just have fun, and I think the big thing with me and Chanel is it's easy. And when I go home, I feel like I'm home.
Yeah, family.
Yeah.
So I gotta ask, you reached out to me about this, about our little show here in Dallas, and it always fascinates me to meet people for the first time, and get to know them and get to know their story, and find out how did you come across this Bridging the Divide.
All right, so as we talked off air a little bit, right? So I'm working an extra duty job, and I'm kind of looking for something to listen to, and I pull up Spotify, and it comes up as suggestions for you, a podcast you may like. And it was you guys. And I think you guys put your first episode out the day before this.
You mean episode 1?
Episode 1.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Back in August of 2021.
Yep. So
I'm just amazed it even showed up as a suggestion with only 1 episode out there.
So 1 episode, I click into it, I listen, and the rest is history, and we kind of, as you guys have progressed your show, right, like every day I try to, work on myself a little bit, right? And hearing from other people, I think a big thing, a very admirable thing for me is the ability to be vulnerable and the ability to tell your story, right? Because you don't know who's out there that feels the exact same way that you feel. You don't know, who you can positively affect, right? And as time's gone on for me, I take being vulnerable very serious because I want other people to be able to learn from my past and my, shortcomings on where my errors were, and maybe help correct their path a little bit so they didn't have to feel the way that I felt. So that's how I stumbled across you guys, and I reached out to you after Danny's episode because that episode was, it just hit me a little different.
Explain that.
The last 15 minutes of your episode, what you had to say for personal growth and self-growth, it just resonated. For whatever reason, I can't necessarily pinpoint it, but I listened to it. I think I probably listened to it 3 or 4 times, just the last 15 minutes. And it was after that I reached out to you to let him know. I think that was my first message to you.
It was. Actually, I think I took a screenshot and sent it to him. So when I have people on and tell their story, and getting Danny to do this was really hard. I was asking him from day one to be an episode, and I'll help you with it, but I'm not going to do that. But I'm very persuasive. So you started listening August 20th of 2021, and then you finally reached out in June of 2024.
Yeah.
So you've obviously seen a change in this show as far as this production quality and
thanks for not kicking us to the curb after the first episode.
Yeah, with the sound issues, we all know. Hey, we gotta say the stories from everybody from day one from Ed Lujan, who you've met, and
thankfully that showed through the show, and you get past some of the other stuff with the sound. But
but the stories have always been. We've been very lucky that when people come in and sit with us, that they have been very open and honest, and you know the reason I started this show and what I got the idea from, and it is vulnerability. It is being open and honest, because it is really tough to do that, especially in this first responder profession, because we're all, we got to be tough, but it's really hard to especially be this open in a closed setting, and now you're going to do it in front of a mic, and a lot of ears are going to hear it. When I heard other officers tell their stories, and Ed was the first one that I heard at that seminar that I was at, I knew that, and I watched the reaction. I knew there was value in it. And obviously, from Dallas, Texas, all the way to Massachusetts, that mission, at least that time, was fulfilled.
Yeah, I think, it's important to ultimately, acknowledge that we're all doing the same thing. You guys are all the way down here in Dallas. I'm all the way up there, on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And, we go talk to a cop in Washington State. And everyone feels, right? Everyone's going to be exposed to an extent and feel the same way that we all feel, So it is important for us to, be willing to talk about it, because I hope that we can all positively impact, even if it's one other person, which, like I said to you guys, your episodes, taught me a lot about, self-growth for myself, just through hearing other people and their experiences and how they overcome stuff. So, I appreciate the connection that we've made, and, it's an honor to be here with you guys,
Well, being in this wellness unit, the show's mission was at a wellness seminar, and we got it from, and we've kind of cultivated here, and changing culture is really hard to do, and especially with something that's so entrenched in the police and fire military profession. But we're proud that this is a positive side effect of changing culture. And letting people know, listeners know, whether you're a civilian that maybe could gain a little bit better understanding of this culture or the job or what we go through, they may hear something, and they have heard something that could help them in their daily life. That means a lot. You reaching out, and at that time you reached out, there wasn't even talk of coming on, and
yeah, we talked for probably a couple weeks here and there, back and forth, and obviously it evolved, and it's like I said,
here you are.
Yeah, here we are.
I want to get your view on, because it really is fascinating. I mean, we do a lot of talking offline to make these things happen, but your view on forgiveness. Can you tell the listener what that is?
Yeah. All right, so as life progresses, right? So I was just angry for a very long time, and ultimately, what was it getting me? I resented people, and I resented my past, and like I had said, Brandon thinks, Brandon gets on police department, no issues for Brandon, right? And it needed to be unpacked, right? And forgiveness is a big piece of that. So, right, kind of naturally how I gravitate towards you guys and you gravitated back was that a lot of the forgiveness that I needed to give and still actively am looking to give is right here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I have not seen my biological father since it's been 21 years. I never met my biological grandmother. I don't know an entire side of me. But they're here. They're, within an hour or two from what I know. And I am actively, as Chanel and I are here until Sunday, I'm actively seeking them out. Just to have a conversation, and we have not been as successful as we were anticipating thus far, but I actually got a text at 4 a.m. today from my biological father that said, hey, I hear you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. You know, I'll come to you. You can come to me. Let's connect. Then he tells me that he really wants me to meet my grandmother. It is a dream of hers to have met one of her grandkids. So it's me and Brittany are, full siblings. Me and Brittany, come from, from them. And she's never met either one of us. So a piece of forgiveness, right? So my biological father reached out to me when through social media when I was 17, and there was nothing in me that had anything for him, right? It was like an instant shutdown. We had one conversation on the phone. It was about 10 minutes. It was on Thanksgiving night, and that was it. We never talked again. You fast forward, and I think, like I said, if God gives you a path, you follow it. And gravitating towards this podcast and, towards connecting with you guys, and you put all the pieces together, now I'm here, and, when am I going to, I don't know if I'm going to be here again. I don't know when I'm going to be here again, right? Time ticks every day. None of us are getting any younger, life happens fast. And I would love to, connect with both, one, none. Ultimately, we'll see how it plays out. I'll keep you guys updated as we go.
Yeah, well, we wish you well with that, for sure.
So, we're here to, ultimately, the forgiveness would be towards him, and the openness would be towards her, right, to meet me before it's too late. So,
what do you want to say to her?
I think maybe just both of us being in the same room for a period of time will have a healing factor for both people, I think it would mean a lot to her, and it would kind of give some closure to me on, what I don't know. I don't know. There's I kind of have a theory of, doors, right? It's not lamps, doors, right? So I kind of have a theory that, right, everything in your life is a door, right? So I think the biggest thing, the courage is going up and being willing to knock on every door, Some doors are meant to remain closed. Some doors, are easy to open. Some doors we go up and knock and, we show vulnerability and we put ourselves out there and no one answers. Some doors, as we all know, some doors are exigent. Maybe we force entry. Meeting her before leaving here, I'm leaning more towards exigency, because this is probably the last chance I'll ever have.
Brandon, like Danny said, we hope you can go through that door to meet your grandmother or your father, and at least you can have either a beginning or a close to that side of the story for you, right?
Yeah.
I do have one final question for you. Looking back on how far you've come since you and your sister were actually policing adults as a 7 and 11-year-old in the house, knowing what you know now, what message would you give 13-year-old Brandon that would inspire him to stay the course and have hope?
Never forget the why. Right? You're going to have one chance to be the man that you never had in your life. You're going to have one chance to become everything you always wanted to follow. Stay true to yourself, grow to be bold, lead others, advocate for others, and protect those that can't protect themselves. The number one piece, I think, would be look to the helpers. If this is 13-year-old Brandon, knowing the trajectory that I'm on right now, you are going to be blessed with a lot of people that, right, as my friend said to me, it's easy to do something for someone that can do nothing for you. What you're doing is things for people that can never pay you back. The people that stepped up in my life, you know, as I progressed through, you know, my teen years into my early adult, into my policing career, to where I am right now, I still have helpers around me every day. Look to them. Let them guide you, because they want to see you become the best version of yourself. Believe in them and they're going to believe in you. So look to the helpers and remember the doors. Don't be afraid to knock.
Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey Mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Down when you're lonely, and I'll pull you up. Life leaves you heavy when the going gets tough. I'll be your shoulder, together we'll run up from the bottom, yeah, we'll rise above. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey Mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey Mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far, for the gold and the blue, I'll never give up on you.